This is ADCOP, the UAE's pipeline system built to move oil around the Strait of Hormuz. But it is not just a pipe in the desert. It is a 380-kilometer export machine running from Habshan, deep inside Abu Dhabi's oil country, across sand, salt flats, heat, and mountain terrain, all the way to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. And that is what makes it so important. Because when Hormuz becomes dangerous, the UAE does not just need another route. It needs the entire system to work. The pumps, the valves, the pressure controls, the leak detection, the storage tanks, and the offshore loading buoys that let tankers fill outside the choke point. So, by the end of this, you'll understand how the UAE built one of the most important oil bypass systems in the world, and why the hardest part was never just laying the pipeline. Let's start at the beginning. The route begins at Habshan, a major oil and gas processing hub in the southwestern desert of Abu Dhabi, about 250 kilometers inland. This is where crude from the Emirates' western fields is gathered, processed, and prepared for export. The challenge was getting that oil from Habshan to the Indian Ocean across extremely difficult terrain: loose desert sand, soft alluvial deposits, and the jagged foothills of the Hajar Mountains. None of that is easy ground for a high-pressure steel pipeline. That made route selection critical. Engineers could not simply draw a straight line to Fujairah and start digging. Soft desert sand shifts under load. Sabkha, the salt-encrusted coastal plain common across the Emirates, is saturated with corrosive brine that can damage unprotected steel over time. Farther east, the terrain becomes harder and more fractured as it approaches the Hajar Mountains. So engineers studied soil profiles, geology, and topography across multiple possible corridors before choosing the 380-kilometer route that ADCOP now follows from Habshan to Fujairah. Once the route is chosen, the real work begins. ADCOP is a 380-kilometer, 48-inch crude pipeline running across the Arabian Desert. Because it carries oil under high pressure, any failure along the line would be a serious industrial event. That is why the pipe uses high-pressure steel, external corrosion-resistant coatings, and extra protection in aggressive ground conditions, especially near the Sabkha zones close to Fujairah, where salt-rich soil can quickly attack unprotected metal. Heat adds another challenge. Summer temperatures in Abu Dhabi's interior often exceed 45 degrees Celsius, and crude moving through a sun-baked steel pipe does not behave in a fixed way. As it warms, it expands, its viscosity changes, and pressure shifts along the line. So, ADCOP is not operated with one static set of numbers. It is monitored continuously from a control room in Abu Dhabi, where pump speeds and valve positions are adjusted in real time to keep the full 380-kilometer system within safe limits. Speaking of pumps, crude oil cannot move 380 kilometers on its own, so ADCOP uses pump stations along the route. Each station receives oil at lower pressure and pushes it forward with high-horsepower centrifugal pumps. The spacing and power of those stations matter because the terrain changes constantly. Some sections need more energy than others, depending on elevation and pipe conditions. If that balance is wrong, the system can create slow-moving sections or dangerous overpressure. But pumps alone aren't enough. Distributed along the route are remotely operated valve stations that can isolate individual sections of the pipeline in the event of a pressure anomaly. And those valves are there because without them, a rupture anywhere along ADCOP would drain a frightening volume of crude into the desert before anyone could respond manually. This is the kind of outcome that is an environmental disaster. So the system is designed to detect sudden pressure drops consistent with a leak and close the nearest isolation valves automatically, a process that happens faster than any human operator could react. The leak detection logic itself works by continuously comparing the volume of oil entering each pipeline segment with the volume leaving it. When those numbers diverge beyond a defined threshold, alarms trigger across the entire control network. Is this system perfect? Not quite. And I think it's worth being honest about that. Leak detection on a pipeline this long can have delays, and very small seeps may not be picked up by pressure monitoring alone. That is why ADCOP also relies on aerial surveillance and satellite imagery to monitor the pipeline corridor for signs of hydrocarbons on the surface. Pressure sensors, aerial checks, and satellite monitoring together give operators a stronger chance of catching a serious problem early. But reasonable confidence is not the same as absolute certainty. Now, all of that infrastructure brings the crude to Fujairah, where the pipeline connects to one of the most important export facilities in the Middle East. This is what turns ADCOP from a long steel pipe into a real bypass system. Once crude reaches the coast, it needs storage before it can be loaded onto tankers. Fujairah's tank farms provide that buffer, holding tens of millions of barrels so exports can keep moving, even when tanker schedules and pipeline delivery volumes do not line up perfectly. The export terminal uses marine loading arms connected to subsea pipelines that run out to single-point mooring buoys offshore. Those buoys let very large crude carriers load oil in deep water without entering a conventional berth. That matters because fixed docks can quickly become a bottleneck when millions of barrels need to move through one facility. With single-point moorings, multiple tankers can load offshore at the same time, giving Fujairah far more export capacity than its coastline footprint suggests. When the Strait of Hormuz closed in 2026, ADCOP became more than a backup plan. It moved oil from Abu Dhabi's interior fields to the open ocean at around 1.5 million barrels per day when running at capacity. That was useful, but not enough. Before the closure, the UAE exported more than twice that amount through Hormuz, and the strait as a whole carried about 20 million barrels of Gulf crude every day. So even at full capacity, ADCOP could only cover part of the UAE's exports. Other Gulf producers, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar, had no comparable fallback because building a high-pressure pipeline across 380 kilometers of desert, plus a deep-water export terminal on another coast, takes years of planning, billions of dollars, and geography that most Gulf states simply do not have. And that's the part that tends to get quietly overlooked when people talk about ADCOP as though it resolves the Hormuz problem. It doesn't resolve it. It manages a portion of it, and even that partial management creates its own vulnerability. Because concentrating all of the UAE's bypass export capacity at a single point on the Gulf of Oman coast means that Fujairah itself becomes the new critical node, the one facility that everything depends on. And Iranian drone strikes hit Fujairah 3 times in March 2025, setting storage tanks on fire and suspending tanker loadings for days at a stretch each time. Which tells you something important about the system the UAE built. It's real, it's functional, it's genuinely the most sophisticated Hormuz bypass infrastructure that exists anywhere in the Gulf. And it's still, ultimately, a single point.